Susan, not her real name, a young African woman in her early 30s, enjoyed her life as a housekeeper to an Australian family living in East Africa. When they offered to take her back with them to Sydney, she was naturally excited and accepted the offer. As soon as she arrived in Australia, however, things began to change. Her employer treated her as if she were nobody, locking her in the house whenever she left, forcing her to work 18-hour days without pay, and giving her nothing to eat but rice. She slept under a dining room table with the 3 dogs, and her alarm clock was her employer's children kicking her in the morning and telling her to get up. When she tried to escape, she was recaptured by her employer's friend and neighbour. Though Susan was eventually able to contact the police and liberated from servitude, she is sadly one of many people effectively enslaved in our world. According to the Global Slavery Index 2016, Australia has one of the lowest rates of human trafficking on earth. But that is no cause to be smug. There are an estimated 4,300 victims of human trafficking in Australia today, smuggled in for forced labour, involuntary marriages, sexual exploitation, and even organ trafficking. The Second Vatican Council said certain sins were especially infamous on 3 counts: that they poison human society, that they damage the perpetrators even more than the victims, and that they supremely dishonour the Creator. This special class of infamies included direct attacks upon human life, such as murder, genocide, abortion, euthanasia, and suicide. Direct attacks upon human integrity, such as mutilation, torture, and coercion. And direct attacks upon human dignity, such as arbitrary imprisonment or deportation, slavery and prostitution, trafficking in women and children, and otherwise treating human beings as mere objects or tools for profit rather than as free and responsible persons. Though in the optimistic 1960s, most people imagined that slavery was a thing of the past, the Vatican Council rather presciently listed it amongst the worst things yet to be effectively abolished from human society, and the willingness to enslave others amongst the worst things yet to be eradicated from the human heart. Slavery, the Council recognised, is amongst the most egregious sins because by instrumentalising human beings, it desecrates the image of God in them. More recently, the scourge of human trafficking has been described by Pope Francis as an open wound on the body of contemporary society. The Church is playing an ever-growing role in the international effort to stamp out the slave trade. But as individuals, we too must consider what we might do. In today's first reading, the Amalekites attack the Israelites, planning to enslave the survivors. Only when Moses ascends the hilltop with arms outstretched are the attacks repelled. Like a bishop assisted by 2 deacons, they sit the exhausted Moses down on a stone cathedra, and Aaron and Hur help him hold up his arms until sunset. I've appreciated that image more than ever this past year in my own debility. But Moses here is a premonition, not principally of fatigued prelates, but of Christ on the cross, whom prelates and priests echo when we stretch out our arms in the Holy Eucharist. You might have noticed that I observed the ancient Dominican practice of stretching out my arms in cruciform fashion immediately after the consecration. The meaning of Moses' gesture and of the priests is straightforward. We must give ourselves in self-sacrifice for others if good is to triumph over evil. Christ's was the ultimate sacrifice for us, laying down his life so that we might have new life. But our lives too must be Eucharists, freely given in service for others. Our lives too must be diaconate, holding up those who are weighed down by their troubles. What makes such service worthy, redemptive, life-giving is that it is freely given. Christ might have been treated like a slave, but what he gave freely. Love and the service of love can only be given freely. The campaign in modernity to stamp out slavery has largely been associated with people of Christian faith. We might think of St. Josephine Bakita, the Sudanese woman whose life became a modern parable against contemporary slavery. Or we think of the English poet John Newton, author of the popular Christian hymn Amazing Grace, whose personal experience of salvation led him to renounce his life as a slave trader and ultimately become an Anglican minister and an anti-slavery campaigner. In 1788, the year Australia was settled by the British, Newton published his blazing tract, Thoughts upon the Slave Trade, which described the horrific conditions he had seen on slave ships. It will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me, he said, that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. The pamphlet was distributed to all MPs and helped the campaign of another Christian, William Wilberforce, to whom Newton was spiritual guide and to whom Newton in fact persuaded to remain in politics, to outlaw slavery in the British Empire. Newton lived to see that achieved in 1807, dying a few weeks after the passage of the bill. But what, we might ask, might any of us do today? Well, as with so many issues, we must first search our hearts to see if there is violence, lust for control over others, disrespect for human life or dignity or freedom to be found deep within us. If so, we must, with God's help, root it out. Next, we should seek to learn more about the issue and reflect upon what faith and reason have to say about it, so that our passion is not just a fashionable cause or a hobby ideology. We might talk with our friends and family and work colleagues about the issue, not obsessively like a fanatic, but with the facts and charm and persuasion. We might let our political leaders know we care about this issue and ensure that our newfound sensitivity influences our own purchasing and other decisions. We will keep our eyes open for examples of forced marriage or forced labour in our own neighbourhood. I've discovered many ideas at the Australian Catholic Religious Against Human Trafficking website, acrath, akrath.org.au. Even if we can't personally intervene to assist the 4,500 Susans who are victims of human trafficking right here in Australia today, or the millions around the world, we can certainly do this. We can pray for them. In our Gospel today, Jesus tells us a parable about the need to pray continually and never lose heart. As Pope Francis has said, prayer is the source of our energy as Christians, the means through which we become the salt of the earth and light to the world. This is what makes us more than simple secular do-gooders. Prayer helps restore our faith in God and man. In the face of evils like slavery that can seem so intractable in our world, prayer allows us to persevere in actions of love that preach more powerfully than words against human oppression and exploitation. And prayer strengthens our hope for the coming of a kingdom of justice, freedom and peace, and inspires us to advance that kingdom under the power of amazing grace.